We're back now for more conversation about soul healing with Dr. Bruce Goldberg, whose new book is that title. But you also had a made-for-television movie based on one of your previous books that I want to find out more about, The Search for Grace. Now, what was that case?
This is a patient named Ivy, as I call her, who came to me in 1987, and she was obsessively attracted to a man who tried to murder her on 2 different occasions. She could not end this relationship. She was an out-of-state patient, so I had to see her for several months. By the time May of 1988 occurred, I took her into 45 previous lives. She was murdered by the same man in 19 of those lives. Number 46 was very relevant. That was a life she lived in Buffalo, New York in 1927. Her name was Grace Doze. She was an unhappily married woman having an affair with a bootlegger named Jake, who murders her on May 17th, 1927. And this was the final life that we did. Her problems were resolved. It was a great case. She broke up with this man I call Johnny. And by the way, I spoke to her just a few months ago, so that's now, 9 years later almost. She finally was able to resolve it. The interesting thing was that CBS hired an independent researcher. They documented this case as fully as you can document a case. Not only did she give 2 dozen factors which were corroborated by newspaper and police reports, but she gave 2 facts that weren't corroborated initially. The reporters made errors. And only going to the birth and death certificates in New York State that requires government permission, or the governor's permission, through a very complicated bureaucracy, they found out that she was right, the reporters made errors. There's no way she could have known those 2 facts. It was the age of her, at her death and the name of her son. We had to go through birth and death certificates for that. And so this is now one of the most documented cases of the century, which is one level, that's nice. But my purpose as a clinician is that she's alive today, and she's empowered, and she is not number 21 on the list of being murdered by the same guy.
I was going to say, so does this mean she doesn't have to do it anymore?
Doesn't have to do it anymore. Her and Johnny will no longer be sipping tea. They're done. The karma is complete. And so The Search for Grace to me is a very dynamic case of empowerment, of getting off of the Mr. Wrong mentality. Another case in the book is a very dynamic one about bereavement. A man, I call him Lloyd. His daughter was killed at age 18 right in front of his house in a car accident. And his life fell apart. I didn't see him because he didn't call me for 7 months. When I saw him, we went through the superconscious mind tap. In this level, he was able to access the spirit of his departed daughter, get her into the white light, because she was a very traumatically affected soul, not a very happy camper on the astral plane, as we call it. And not only was that very important for his bereavement, but then he was able to do a future life progression in which he was to see her in the 22nd century as his granddaughter, as he is a scholar, in about 120 years or so. And all this resulted in him overcoming his bereavement. This case was done over 7 years ago. And in fact, I just saw him recently. We were doing a television show, interesting. And here's a case of a person who, his life was just a wreck, and he was the one who was able to benefit by this. 98% of the therapy is done by the patient. I never take credit for a patient's case, nor do I take the responsibility for a failure, because it's always the patient. This is psychic empowerment, and 98% of the therapy is done during the dream or REM cycle, because there are no defense mechanisms functioning then, whereas they do function during the day. So this is the nice thing about the therapy. You're not codependent on the therapist. I mean, this is very short-term therapy. You can use tapes, you can use other ways of doing this, but you don't have to see someone for the rest of your life. You can take charge.
I want to ask you in a minute about how you figure out who to go see if you decide that that's the way you want to pursue it. But I also want to ask, I'm sure there must be some people who are listening